It was a quiet afternoon when District Attorney Lucas Winters finally pulled into the driveway of his suburban home. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the neatly kept lawn and the rows of identical houses on his street. After a long and grueling day in court, Lucas couldn't wait to get inside, unwind, and spend some time with his wife, Emily. They had plans for a peaceful evening, just the two of them. No work, no stress. Just dinner and the kind of conversation they hadn't had in weeks, thanks to his exhausting caseload. As he parked his car and cut the engine, a sharp scream shattered the tranquility of the moment. It was a scream, full of pain, fear, and desperation. Without thinking, his body jerked into motion. His heart raced, pumping adrenaline into his veins as he bolted out of the car, his feet hitting the gravel in quick, desperate steps. His mind barely registered the sound of tires screeching from a passing vehicle as he sprinted toward the source of the scream. "Emily!" he shouted, panic seizing his chest. His throat went dry, and the words felt foreign in his mouth. He had never imagined he would be running into his own yard, desperate to find his wife in danger. He rounded the corner of the house, and there in the front yard was the last sight he could have expected to see. His wife, Emily, was lying on the ground, her face pale and contorted in pain, blood seeping from a wound on her forehead. Her legs were twisted beneath her in an unnatural position, her hand clutching the grass as if trying to hold on to the earth itself. His breath caught in his throat. The world around him seemed to stop. A large brick, now smeared with blood, lay beside her like an accuser, evidence of the vicious attack. The sight of it, the weight of what had just happened, hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, struggling to comprehend what was unfolding before him. "Emily, no!" he cried, kneeling by her side, his hands shaking as he reached for her, trying to assess the damage. His heart hammered in his chest, and everything around him seemed to blur into the background as his only focus became her. "Stay with me, Eminencia. Stay with me," Lucas whispered urgently, his voice cracking as he touched her face. Her eyes fluttered open, weak and confused, but there was recognition in them. She tried to speak, but only a faint groan escaped her lips, and Lucas could feel the life slipping from her. Her blood stained the earth beneath them, and all he could think was that he was too late to stop this. Panic surged through him. His trained, legal mind raced through scenarios as he assessed the situation. But nothing could prepare him for this. Nothing could prepare him for the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Suddenly, the front door of the house swung open, and a familiar voice shouted, "What happened?" It was one of the neighbors, a man named Thomas, who had heard the scream and rushed over. Lucas turned to him, trying to explain, but his words tangled in his throat. The panic was choking him. "We need to get her to a hospital," Lucas said, his voice trembling with urgency. Thomas nodded, moving quickly to help lift Emily. As they carefully moved her, Lucas's eyes darted around the yard, searching for any sign of the attacker. His gaze stopped at a figure standing near the edge of the property. There, at the end of the driveway, stood Karen Williams, the woman from the neighborhood, a well-known member of the HOA. She stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with a strange mixture of shock and defiance. I didn't mean to," Karen muttered, her voice trembling, but there was something about her tone, something in the way she looked at Lucas, that sent a chill down his spine. "You did this, Karen," Lucas said, his voice dangerously calm, betraying the storm of rage inside him. He took a step toward her, his fists clenched at his sides. "You attacked my wife with a brick?" Karen's eyes widened. She took a step back, shaking her head. I was just trying to... I was trying to protect the neighborhood," she stammered, the excuse coming out in a rush as though she had rehearsed it in her mind. Lucas couldn't believe his ears. Protect the neighborhood? From what? From his wife, who had been parking in front of their own home. The words made no sense, but the coldness in her voice and the way she avoided eye contact with him made his blood run cold. "You are going to regret this," Lucas growled under his breath, his eyes narrowing with a fury that only someone in his position could muster. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was personal. And Karen had just crossed a line. As Thomas helped Lucas lift Emily into the back of his car to rush her to the hospital, Lucas couldn't tear his eyes away from Karen, standing there with that expression of twisted justification. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The DA in him knew this was just the beginning of something far more dangerous. But the husband in him wanted to make sure Karen would never hurt his family again. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Every second, Lucas felt the weight of what had just happened settle deeper into his chest. He kept glancing at Emily, her eyes closed, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Thomas drove quickly, but Lucas couldn't escape the horror of what he'd witnessed, the brick, the blood, and the twisted look on Karen's face. His mind raced. What had led to this? Was this some sort of retaliation for something trivial, something that could have been avoided? Or had Karen been planning this all along? When they reached the hospital, Lucas didn't wait for the car to come to a full stop. He was out of the vehicle before Thomas could even park. He rushed through the doors, his wife's life hanging by a thread, his thoughts spinning like a tornado. A flurry of nurses and doctors swarmed around them, taking Emily into the emergency room. Lucas was left standing outside, his fists clenched, his mind still reeling from the attack. He couldn't focus on anything. His only thought was Emily and whether she would make it through this. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, a nurse came out to update him. She's stable for now, but it's touch and go. We've got her in surgery. The words barely registered in Lucas's mind. All he could think of was Karen, standing there in his front yard, like nothing was wrong. It was like she didn't even see the severity of what she had done. Just as the nurse left, Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. His hands trembled as he pulled it out, expecting a message about Emily's condition. Instead, it was a text from a number he didn't recognize. The message was brief, but it was all too clear. You should have known better than to challenge the HOA. This is just the beginning. The message sent a shockwave through Lucas. He stared at the words, his mind racing. It wasn't just Karen. Whoever had sent this was sending a message. They had targeted his family for a reason, and they weren't going to stop at one attack. Lucas could feel the anger boiling in him, but with it came a sense of foreboding. This wasn't just an assault. This was a calculated move. Something larger was at play here. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Thomas, his face grim. They're looking for Karen. The neighbors are talking, Thomas said, his voice low. Lucas nodded but didn't say anything. He knew Karen well enough. She wasn't someone who would back down easily. If anything, she would try to twist the narrative, paint herself as a victim in all of this. She had a history of making enemies, especially within the community, and now she had crossed a line that Lucas couldn't ignore. Do you think she's behind this message? Lucas asked quietly. Thomas hesitated before answering. It's possible. I've heard things, rumors that she's got connections, but I didn't think she'd go this far. Not until now. Lucas's mind raced. He had to get to the bottom of this, and quickly. The attack on his wife was just the beginning, and if Karen had indeed involved others in this, he needed to expose it before it spiraled further out of control. Without waiting for another word, Lucas turned and made his way to the hospital's payphone. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He dialed the number of his colleague, Detective Riley, who was familiar with the neighborhood and its residents. Riley, I need you to dig into Karen Williams. She's behind this, and I need to know everything about her. Her history, her connections, everything. And I want it yesterday. Lucas ordered, his voice sharp. I'll get right on it. Riley replied, his tone calm but understanding. Hanging up, Lucas returned to the waiting area, his mind working overtime. The wheels were turning. He couldn't afford to waste time. Karen had made a move against his family, and he would make sure she paid for it. But as he sat there, the image of Karen standing outside his house, watching his wife's blood soak into the grass, haunted him. It wasn't just a random attack. This had been personal. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again, and Lucas's heart skipped a beat. It was another text, this time from a different number. You think you can win? You're just one man, Lucas. The HOA doesn't work like that. The message was a direct threat. but it also spoke volumes. The HOA was involved. This wasn't a one-time incident, it was a carefully orchestrated plan, and Lucas had unknowingly walked into a battle much larger than he could have imagined. His hands clenched around the phone, his mind swirling with possibilities. He was the district attorney. He had fought countless legal battles, but this was something far more dangerous. It wasn't just the law he was up against, it was an entire system, a network of people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The door to the waiting area opened, and a nurse stepped in, her face serious. "Mr. Winters, you can come in now. She's out of surgery and she's stable. But we need to keep her under observation for a while." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. He felt a small wave of relief wash over him. Emily was going to be okay, at least for now, but the fight was far from over. He had to keep going, not just for Emily, but for the truth. "I'll be right there," Lucas said, standing up quickly. As he walked towards the room, he felt his resolve harden. Karen would not get away with this. Not now, not ever. The HOA might think they were untouchable, but Lucas was about to show them just how wrong they were. As Lucas stepped into Emily's hospital room, a cold wave of relief washed over him. She was lying in bed, hooked up to an array of monitors, but she was alive. Her face was bruised, a long gash running across her temple, but her breathing was steady. The worst had passed for now, but the fight was far from over. He gently pulled a chair next to her bed, taking her hand into his. The warmth of her skin under his touch steadied him, giving him a moment of clarity amid the chaos that surrounded him. He needed to stay focused. Karen and the HOA were dangerous, and Lucas had no illusions about what they were capable of. The moment the door opened, Lucas tensed, his body instinctively bracing for what was coming. But it wasn't the police or anyone from the HOA, it was Detective Riley holding a file in his hands, his expression serious. "Detective," Lucas said, his voice tight, with barely contained anger. "What do you have for me?" Riley sat down across from him, flipping open a file. "I've been looking into Karen Williams, like you asked. And you're right, there's more to her than meets the eye. She's a member of the HOA, but there's also a history of her clashing with multiple residents. Not just petty arguments, actual violent incidents." Lucas felt his jaw tighten. He had suspected there was more to Karen's behavior than simple neighborhood disputes. "Tell me everything," Lucas demanded, his eyes never leaving Riley's face. Riley leaned in, lowering his voice. "She's been involved in several incidents over the past few years, mostly property damage, threats, even a few physical altercations. But here's the kicker. She's connected to some pretty influential people. I'm talking about HOA members with a lot of power, people who've covered for her in the past." Lucas clenched his fists. The image of Karen attacking his wife, standing there in his front yard like she had all the power in the world, fueled the fire in his veins. "I need names," Lucas said, his voice sharp. Riley nodded. "I've got them. I'm still pulling details, but it's clear that Karen's not acting alone. There's a whole network behind her. People who think they can do whatever they want and get away with it." Lucas didn't flinch. He had known from the moment Karen had attacked Emily that this wasn't just an isolated incident, but hearing it confirmed stoked the fire inside him even more. This wasn't just about getting justice for his wife. This was about bringing down a whole system of corruption and power abuse. "I'll take care of the rest," Lucas said coldly, standing up and gripping the file in his hand. "Get me everything you have on Karen and the HOA, Riley. This is bigger than you or me." Riley met his gaze, and for a moment, the two men shared a silent understanding. "I'm with you, Lucas. We'll get her. All of them." With that, Riley stood and left, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts and Emily's steady breathing in the background. The quiet of the room felt suffocating, but Lucas couldn't afford to stop moving. Not now. The HOA, Karen, and everyone who stood behind her had made one huge mistake. They had underestimated him. Hours passed before Lucas was finally able to leave the hospital, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Emily was stable, but her recovery would take time. He had promised her that he would fight for justice, and that promise was one he intended to keep. As he walked through the hospital parking lot, his phone buzzed again, cutting through the quiet of the night. He didn't need to look at the screen to know it was another message from someone trying to intimidate him. He had expected this. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, not after everything they had done. When he unlocked the phone, the message was exactly what he had feared. You think you can take down the HOA? We'll bury you before you even get started. Consider this your warning. The words were a chilling reminder of just how far these people would go to protect their interests. But Lucas wasn't intimidated. If anything, the threats made him more determined. They had underestimated him, and now they would pay the price. He stuffed the phone back into his pocket, his eyes narrowing with resolve. He wasn't just the district attorney, he was a man with a mission, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not Karen, not the HOA, or anyone else, stand in his way. By the time he got back home, the moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the neighborhood. His house felt cold, distant, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. He walked inside, his mind already turning over the next steps. The HOA had made a dangerous move. They had attacked his family, and now it was time to fight back, not just for Emily, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by Karen and her kind. He wouldn't stop until they paid for what they had done. The next morning, Lucas took his first real steps toward retaliation. He contacted a few trusted colleagues, those who had always been in his corner, and started building a case against the HOA. But this wouldn't be a normal case. It couldn't be. Lucas knew the stakes were higher now. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting against a system that operated with impunity. As the hours passed, his phone continued to buzz with messages. The HOA was trying to intimidate him, but Lucas ignored every single one. The more they threatened, the more determined he became. He would not back down. Not now. Not ever. The battle had just begun. And Lucas Winters wasn't going to let the HOA get away with this. He had a wife to protect, a family to fight for, and a whole community that deserved better. The day after Emily's surgery, Lucas had no intention of slowing down. As soon as the sun began to rise, he was already in the office, poring over the evidence that Riley had provided. The HOA's corruption was deep, its influence widespread, and the more he dug into it, the more he realized this was not just a local problem, it was a systemic issue that extended far beyond the confines of a small town. But as much as Lucas wanted to continue unraveling the HOA's web, he knew he needed help. He couldn't fight this alone. He needed someone with the resources, connections, and authority to bring the full weight of the law down on the HOA. That's when he thought of Catherine Wells, the FBI director. She wasn't just a colleague, she was a trusted ally, and with her support, Lucas knew they could tear down the entire network that had protected people like Karen for years. He dialed Catherine's number, his pulse quickening as it rang. When she picked up, her calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension in his chest. "Lucas, what's going on? I'm hearing whispers about you and an HOA case. Are you in trouble?" Lucas took a deep breath, steadying himself before responding. "Catherine, I need your help. It's bigger than just a local case. I'm going up against an HOA that's been abusing its power for years. Karen Williams isn't acting alone, and I've got evidence that the HOA has protected her and others like her. I need the FBI's resources to take them down." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Lucas could feel Catherine weighing her options, evaluating the risks, but he knew she would come through for him. She always had. "All right, Lucas. I'm in. You're right. This isn't just an HOA dispute. It's systemic corruption, and we're going to bring them down. I'll make a few calls and get things moving on our end. We're going to need everything: records, testimony, surveillance. If we're going to take them out, we'll need a full-scale operation." Lucas felt a sense of relief wash over him. Catherine was right. They couldn't just rely on the evidence he had gathered so far. This would require a coordinated effort, one that would involve not just the local authorities but federal resources as well. "Thank you, Catherine. I'm counting on you. I'll have my team meet with you tomorrow. Let's make sure we have everything in place before we make any moves." The last thing we want is to alert them before we're ready. Lucas agreed. Time was not on his side. Every day that passed was a day Karen and her allies could use to cover their tracks, to make things disappear. He had to move quickly. The next day, the FBI team arrived in town. Catherine wasn't alone. She had brought a small but highly skilled team of agents, each one experienced in handling high-stakes investigations like this. As they gathered in Lucas's office, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle against a powerful network of people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. We're going to need to start with the basics, Catherine said as she laid out a map of the HOA's influence. Karen Williams is just one part of the puzzle. We need to know who else is involved. Who's been helping her, who's been covering up her actions, and how deep this corruption runs. Lucas nodded, already thinking about the records he had started to gather. I've got some names, some files, but I'll need your team to help dig into the financial records. There's no way the HOA has been able to maintain this kind of power without laundering money or misappropriating funds. I've got a hunch they've been using that money to pay off local officials, maybe even some law enforcement. Catherine's team immediately began working through the files Lucas had provided, splitting up the tasks to ensure nothing was overlooked. Hours passed in a blur, but Lucas couldn't afford to be distracted by the work. He had his own battles to fight, and he wasn't just the district attorney, he was a husband, and his wife's recovery was still on his mind. Later that night, Lucas was back at home, sitting by Emily's bedside. She was still unconscious, the doctors reassuring him that her recovery would take time, but that she was out of immediate danger. But Lucas knew the emotional scars would take longer to heal. Every time he looked at her, every time he saw the bruise on her face, the image of her lying in the yard, blood seeping from her wound, he was reminded of how much was at stake. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was Catherine. He answered quickly. Lucas, we've got something. We've managed to track down some of the financial records you suspected. There's evidence of offshore accounts, large sums of money being funneled into these accounts from various HOA properties. It's looking like a major money laundering operation. This isn't just about Karen anymore. We've got a bigger fish to fry. Lucas sat up straight, his pulse quickening. He had known there was something more, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. This wasn't just an HOA with a few bad actors, it was a criminal enterprise, one that spanned multiple states. Where do we go from here? Lucas asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We go after their biggest assets. We've got the money trail, and we've got the corruption. Now, we need to expose them in a way that no one can ignore. We're setting up a sting operation. We'll need you to be the face of this. Your position as DA will lend credibility to the case. We're going to bring the whole organization down, Lucas. He knew what that meant. It meant that the battle was just beginning. The HOA might have been a powerful force, but with the FBI backing him, Lucas wasn't going to stop until they were brought to justice. I'm in, Lucas said, his voice cold with determination. Let's end this. For Emily. For everyone they've hurt. As he hung up the phone, Lucas felt the weight of his responsibility sink in. But this time it was different. He wasn't just fighting for his wife's justice. He was fighting for something much bigger than that. This was a war against corruption, and Lucas Winters wasn't going to lose. The following weeks felt like an endless rush of paperwork, meetings, and strategy sessions. Lucas could barely remember the last time he'd had a full night's sleep. Between Emily's recovery and the mounting pressure of the investigation, it seemed as though there was no time to breathe. But he couldn't afford to stop. Not when he was so close to taking down the corrupt system that had tried to destroy his family. Catherine and her team worked tirelessly, pulling apart the financial records, uncovering hidden assets, and tracing the money back to some of the most powerful figures in the region. The HOA's web of influence was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Lucas's worst fears were confirmed. Karen Williams wasn't the only one with blood on her hands. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. The HOA had been involved in everything from bribery to extortion, all hidden behind a facade of community leadership. One afternoon, Lucas sat in his office, staring at a pile of files. He rubbed his temples, the weight of everything pressing down on him. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Catherine. "Lucas, I've got something big." Her voice crackled over the line, urgent but controlled. "We've traced the money further. It's not just local. We're talking about connections that go all the way up. There are ties to federal contractors, real estate moguls, even political figures who've been using the HOA as a front to launder money and push through shady deals." Lucas felt his heart race. The stakes were higher than ever. The deeper they went, the more dangerous this mission became. But he couldn't back down now. He had to stay focused for Emily, for justice, and for everyone who had been wronged by the system. "I knew it," Lucas muttered, more to himself than to Catherine. "We're not dealing with a local problem anymore. This is a nationwide operation." "Exactly. And that's why we need to move quickly," Catherine replied. "We've got the proof, but we need to secure it before they have a chance to cover their tracks. The longer we wait, the more time they have to retaliate." Lucas stood up from his desk, his eyes scanning the room as he processed the new information. His mind raced through every scenario, every possibility. "What's the plan?" "We'll need to stage a covert operation," Catherine said. "We'll go after their biggest assets, money, properties, and influence, and make sure it's all tied back to the corrupt individuals who've been pulling the strings. But we need to do it under the radar. The moment we go public, they'll have their own countermoves in place." Lucas nodded, his jaw clenched in determination. "I'll get my team in place. We'll need a simultaneous strike, all across the board. We hit them where it hurts, financially, legally, and publicly." Catherine's voice grew more serious. "And Lucas, you have to be ready. They're not going to just roll over. The people we're up against have power, and they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in their way. This is going to get ugly." He wasn't afraid. He had made a promise to Emily, and he wasn't going to stop until he saw this through. The more he thought about the attack on his wife, the more determined he became. He couldn't let Karen or anyone like her continue to get away with this. The stakes were too high, and Lucas had a fire inside him now. A fire that would not be extinguished until justice was served. "I'm ready. Let's do this." The next few days were a blur of activity as Lucas coordinated with Catherine and her FBI team. It was all about timing and precision. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Every detail had to be perfect. Lucas worked with his own legal team to secure warrants to gather as much evidence as possible. Catherine's team worked on surveillance, tracking the flow of money and documenting everything they could. They were going after the financial heart of the HOA, properties, offshore accounts, and shell companies that had been used to launder money. The operation was set to begin at dawn. Lucas had no intention of letting the HOA get away with this. They were going to see exactly how far their reach went and how deep the corruption ran. It wasn't just about taking down Karen anymore. The entire system had to go, and with the FBI backing him, Lucas knew they had the resources to pull it off. As dawn broke on the day of the operation, Lucas stood outside his home, looking out at the neighborhood. It felt surreal. Just days ago, he had been standing in that very same yard, staring at Karen as she stood there, smugly justifying her attack on his wife. Now, everything was about to change. He knew that the operation would be messy. The moment they moved in, Karen and the rest of the HOA's inner circle would know something was coming. It would be a fight, but Lucas wasn't afraid. He had a job to do, and nothing, not Karen, not the HOA, was going to stop him. His phone buzzed again. "Catherine." "We're in position," Catherine said, her voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of anticipation. "Everything's set. Let's hit them hard and fast." Lucas took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "Let's end this." The battle for justice had only just begun, but Lucas Winters was prepared. This wasn't just a fight for his wife's safety, it was a fight for the truth. And no one, not even the most powerful members of the HOA, could stand in his way now. The operation was swift and brutal. As soon as the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, the FBI and local authorities descended on the HOA's headquarters, and its affiliated properties. Lucas, watching from his office, felt his heart pound in his chest. He could only imagine the chaos that was unfolding behind those walls. It was the beginning of the end for Karen and everyone who had covered for her. In just a few short hours, Catherine's team had successfully secured key documents, locked down financial records, and taken several of the HOA's top members into custody. But what Lucas hadn't expected was how quickly the operation would uncover more than just a few corrupt individuals. It exposed a deep and systematic abuse of power that reached far beyond the local level. This was an organized network that spanned multiple states, built on bribery, blackmail, and manipulation. Lucas couldn't contain his excitement as he stood in front of a large whiteboard, going over the newly uncovered details with Catherine's team. The connections were more far-reaching than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just an HOA operating in isolation, it was a central hub for a vast operation that involved real estate deals, kickbacks, and secretive deals with federal contractors. The scale of it was staggering. Lucas had never known how deep the corruption ran until now. "Look at this," Catherine said, pointing at a series of documents spread across the table. "We've traced multiple real estate deals back to people who were using their HOA power to secure profits. This wasn't just about running a neighborhood, it was about controlling millions in assets." Lucas leaned in, his fingers hovering over the documents. The names listed in the files were a who's who of influential local businessmen, city council members, and even law enforcement officers. His stomach churned as he recognized the names. People he had trusted, people who had once appeared above reproach. "This is how they did it," Lucas muttered, more to himself than anyone else. They used the HOA as a front, as a cover for all of their illicit activities. They built trust within the community, hiding their real intentions behind a facade of suburban normalcy. Catherine nodded, her eyes locked on the evidence. Karen Williams was just a puppet. She had the power to intimidate and manipulate, but the real masterminds were the ones behind the scenes. They kept her in line because she was the perfect scapegoat. It was a realization that hit Lucas hard. Karen was not the only threat. The system she was part of, the network she represented, was far more dangerous. These weren't just rogue individuals acting on their own whims. They were coordinated and protected by a powerful web of influence. And that web was just beginning to unravel. The door to the office opened, and Riley stepped in, holding a stack of files. His expression was grim. "Lucas, you need to see this." Lucas's gut tightened as he looked at Riley. "What's going on?" "We've got a leak," Riley said. "One of the HOA's lawyers just tipped them off about the operation. We don't know how, but it's clear they've started moving assets. The people we've arrested are already calling their contacts. If we don't act fast, they'll destroy the evidence we've gathered." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "This is exactly what I was worried about. They're not just going to lay down and accept defeat. They'll do everything in their power to bury us." Lucas felt the pressure mounting. They were so close, yet the risk of losing everything was tangible. "We need to move quickly," he said, his voice steady with urgency. "We've got to shut down their network before they can destroy the evidence. Do we have any idea where they're moving the assets?" Riley flipped through the files, scanning them quickly. "Yes, we've got some intel. There's a private offshore account connected to one of their top financiers. If we can trace that, we can stop them from transferring everything out." "Good," Lucas said, feeling the weight of the task ahead. "Get on it immediately. We're not letting them get away with this." As Riley left, Lucas turned to Catherine. "We need to make sure we're 2 steps ahead of them. If they have someone on the inside feeding them information, we have to cut off every channel they have." Catherine's face hardened. "I've already contacted my team. We're going to start monitoring every phone call, every email. The moment we get any indication that they're moving the money, we'll act." Lucas watched as Catherine moved swiftly to her phone, barking orders into it with the kind of authority that only someone like her could command. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to take a breath. He had been fighting this battle for so long, and now it felt like the end was finally in sight. But it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. It wasn't until late into the evening that Lucas received the call he'd been waiting for. Catherine's voice came through the line, tense with excitement. "We've got them." The words sent a rush of adrenaline through his veins. "Where?" "The offshore account is locked. They've been trying to transfer funds for the past 2 hours, but we intercepted the transaction just in time. We've secured all the evidence and frozen their assets. The network is exposed." Lucas felt a surge of relief, but it was mixed with a deep anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. They had done it. They had uncovered the entire operation, but now came the hardest part, exposing it to the world. "Let's finish this," Lucas said, his voice cold with resolve. Tomorrow, they would hold a press conference. They would reveal the truth. They would make sure the world knew exactly how deep the corruption ran and how far people like Karen Williams were willing to go to protect their wealth and power. It was time to put an end to the reign of the HOA and all those who had supported them. The truth was out, and Lucas was ready to make sure it would never be hidden again. The following morning, Lucas stood in front of a crowded press conference, his jaw clenched and his hands gripping the podium with tight intensity. Behind him, Catherine and her team stood, their faces grave but determined. They had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, a moment that would change everything. The truth would be exposed, and with it, the powerful grip that the HOA had on their community. The room was filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and murmurs of anticipation. The weight of the moment pressed down on Lucas's chest. His thoughts briefly drifted to Emily. She had been through so much, and this battle was as much for her as it was for anyone. He wanted this victory not just for the people who had been wronged, but for the woman he loved, the woman who had almost lost her life because of people like Karen Williams. As he cleared his throat, the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," Lucas began, his voice firm and commanding. "What we're about to reveal today is not just the culmination of an investigation, it's the beginning of a new chapter for our community. A chapter where corruption is no longer tolerated, where those who abuse their power are held accountable, and where justice will be served, no matter how deep the conspiracy runs." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. His eyes scanned the room of reporters, but his mind focused on one thing: Karen. Her smug face from the day she attacked Emily was etched in his memory. He couldn't wait to bring the truth to light, to show the world who she really was. For years, the Homeowners Association, an organization meant to serve and protect our community, has been used as a cover for criminal activity. Lucas continued, his voice growing stronger. What started as a dispute over a simple parking spot has led us to uncover a vast network of money laundering, bribery, and corruption involving some of the most influential figures in our city. From real estate moguls to city council members and even law enforcement officers, these individuals have used their power to control our lives and line their pockets, all while operating in the shadows. The room was still. The reporters scribbled frantically on their notepads, trying to absorb every word. But Lucas's words were more than just facts. They were a promise. A promise to expose the truth, no matter the cost. As of this morning, federal and local authorities have secured crucial evidence, including financial records and offshore accounts, that tie these individuals directly to criminal activities. "We've taken action, frozen their assets, and arrested those responsible," Lucas said. "The case against Karen Williams and those who helped her is stronger than ever. And this is just the beginning." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Lucas could see the reporters struggling to process the magnitude of what he had just revealed. He could feel the weight of the truth in the air, thick and heavy. One of the most disturbing aspects of this entire operation is the impact it has had on ordinary people. People like my wife, Emily, who was brutally attacked by Karen Williams in her own driveway, and countless others who have been victimized by this criminal network. He paused, his eyes briefly scanning the reporters, and then settled on the camera in front of him. But make no mistake, we will not rest until every single individual involved in this conspiracy is brought to justice. Our fight doesn't end here. It's just beginning. The room erupted in questions each reporter clamoring to get the first interview to break the story. But Lucas held up a hand, silencing them. I will answer all your questions, but for now, let me remind you all that we are only getting started. The people who have hidden behind this network of corruption have no place in this community anymore. We are going to clean house, and we will make sure they never do this to anyone again. As the press conference ended, Lucas walked off the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment they had all been working for. The truth had been exposed, and the world was watching. But even as he felt the rush of victory, his thoughts turned back to Emily. He needed to see her, to tell her that they had done it. They had fought for her, for justice, and they were winning. Hours later, Lucas arrived at the hospital to find Emily awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes bright despite the lingering pain in her face. She was no longer hooked up to the machines that had kept her alive in the days following the attack, but there was still a certain fragility in her. "Hey," Lucas said softly, walking into the room and sitting beside her. "How are you feeling?" Emily smiled weakly, her voice still a bit hoarse. "I'm alive, Lucas. That's all I need to say." Lucas chuckled softly, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "I didn't think I was going to have you back for a while. You scared the hell out of me." "I'm sorry," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But I'm glad you're fighting back." His heart swelled at her words. "I promised you I would," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done to you, to us." Emily reached out, touching his cheek. "You've already done that. I'm so proud of you, Lucas." The weight of everything they had been through, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, seemed to melt away in that moment. For the first time in weeks, Lucas allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. They had won. They had exposed the truth. And while the fight wasn't over, they had taken the first decisive step toward justice. "I'm just getting started," Lucas said, his voice filled with resolve. "But I'm doing it for you. For us." As they sat together, the future no longer seemed so uncertain. The fight was far from over, but Lucas knew they could handle whatever came next. Together, they would face it all, and in the end, they would come out victorious. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras flashing as they eagerly awaited the start of the trial. The weight of the moment hung in the air like a thick fog, but Lucas stood at the front of the room, unwavering. Today was the day the truth would finally be served to the people who thought they were untouchable. The defense attorney for Karen Williams, a slick man with a tailored suit, stood near the table with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Lucas. The tension in the air was palpable. Lucas knew that this trial wouldn't just be about Karen, it would be about the entire HOA network, about the corrupt system that had abused its power for years. This was the showdown. This was where everything they had worked for would either come to fruition or crumble. As the judge entered the room, the courtroom fell silent. The gavel hit with a resounding crack, and the trial began. "Order in the court," the judge said, his voice steady. "We are here today to hear the case of the state versus Karen Williams, who stands accused of assault, conspiracy, and involvement in an organized criminal network that has operated within this community for years." The defense attorney immediately stood, a look of confidence on his face. "Your Honor, we intend to show that this case is a matter of misunderstanding and that my client's actions were taken in the heat of the moment. There was no conspiracy, just an overreaction to an unfortunate situation." Lucas clenched his fists. It was the same excuse Karen had been using all along. It was the same defense she had tried to push when she had attacked Emily in their driveway. But Lucas was ready. He had the evidence, and he was prepared to take down Karen's entire defense piece by piece. As the prosecution began, Lucas took the stand, his heart pounding with every word he spoke. The truth was on his side, but it wasn't just about presenting evidence, it was about making sure everyone in that room understood the depth of the corruption. He had to make them see what Karen and her allies had done to his wife, to their community, and to everyone who had been affected by the HOA's actions. He started with the evidence, the financial documents, the hidden accounts, and the connections that tied Karen to the powerful figures behind the HOA's operations. He explained how the HOA wasn't just a group of neighborhood organizers, it was a front for a criminal empire that had manipulated the community for years. The members of the HOA had used their position to launder money, push through illegal deals, and intimidate anyone who stood in their way. And then, when my wife was parked in front of our own home, doing nothing more than trying to enjoy a quiet afternoon, Karen Williams attacked her. Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. She didn't just attack her physically. She attacked the very idea of justice, of what this community should stand for. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of his words settled in. I've spent my career fighting for justice, Lucas continued, but when it comes to my own family, I had to watch as someone I thought was a neighbor, someone who was supposed to be part of our community, took that from us. And when I went to the authorities to expose what I knew, I found out that it wasn't just Karen. It was a whole system of people who had been protecting her and others like her. He took a breath, glancing at the defense attorney, who was now trying to regain his composure. We've uncovered that Karen was merely a pawn in a much larger game, a game where people with power and money use their positions to control, manipulate, and destroy anyone who threatened their empire. The defense attorney stood up, trying to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a stern look. Lucas Winters is laying out the facts, and this trial will proceed based on those facts, the judge said firmly. Lucas knew this was the moment. This was when he had to make the case stick. This wasn't just about Karen Williams. It was about every person who had been affected by her actions. It was about making sure the corrupt system she represented didn't have a chance to escape. He turned to face the jury, locking eyes with each member. This case is about more than just one attack. It's about every person who has been hurt by the HOA's actions. It's about standing up to a system that has been built on lies, intimidation, and manipulation. And it's about sending a message to everyone who thinks they're above the law that no one, not even people like Karen Williams, can get away with what they've done. The defense attorney stood up, but there was a tremor in his voice now. Your Honor, this is a gross exaggeration of the facts. Karen Williams is not the mastermind behind this supposed criminal network. She was simply trying to protect her community. But Lucas's words had already struck a chord. The jury was watching carefully, and Lucas could feel their attention on him. He knew that the truth was on his side. He wasn't just presenting evidence, he was telling a story that everyone in that room could understand. The story of a community betrayed, of a family torn apart by the actions of those who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. As the trial continued, it became clear that the defense had no real case. The evidence was too overwhelming, the witnesses too credible. Karen's attempts to shift the blame onto others were unraveling quickly, and Lucas knew that it was only a matter of time before the jury reached their verdict. By the end of the day, after hours of testimony, cross-examination, and closing arguments, the courtroom was tense with anticipation. The jury deliberated, but there was no question in Lucas's mind. He had done what he set out to do. The truth had come out, and there was no turning back. When the jury finally returned, the foreman stood and addressed the court. We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Williams, guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of cheers and gasps. Lucas stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the verdict settling over him. He had won, but it wasn't just about the victory, it was about the justice that had been served. This was a victory for Emily, for every person who had been hurt, and for every community that had been manipulated by the HOA. As the gavel came down, Lucas turned to look at Emily, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, her eyes filled with pride. He had promised her he would fight, and he had kept that promise. They had won together, and for the first time in weeks, Lucas allowed himself a moment of peace. They had won, and justice had finally been served.